Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, today we're going to talk a little bit about conditioning. I know, right? Conditioning. Now, I'm not talking about if you grew up playing sports and you're getting into shape, although that is a level of conditioning also, right? Doing the workouts, doing the training, getting back into shape for the season for your sport, all these things. Again, that is a level of conditioning, not what we're talking about today. What we want to talk about today is the conditioning that you grew up and you developed under. Because, like it or not, you were conditioned in good ways and possibly some ways that were not so great, right? And we all have things that we grew up under. I mean, it wouldn't matter uh, as a youth, how you grew up, what your family life was like, what your developing years were like, what your education, right, was like, what your all these experiences. There was a level of conditioning. Now, pop culture likes to kind of poo-poo the the I guess the crucible of conditioning, and it is true that the conditioning that we get early in life with school is pretty rigid. I mean, it's pretty bland, right? It's pretty cut and dry, but it is essential. It does give us a little bit of a framework. And along the way, I don't think anybody ever said, hey, this is all there is to life. Although, because they may not have said it, that may have been the assumption, right? Hey, this is all there is. And you go out, you get a job, you do the thing, you fall in a traditional role, and you're off to the races. The difficulty is that we never give ourselves a chance in our youth to develop. This is why people in relationships alignments can get, there can be 1 degree of separation at the beginning of a journey could turn into 1,000 miles of separation in the end. And this applies whether we're talking about culture, whether we're talking about any groups you're involved with. It doesn't matter if it's an organization you work for, it doesn't really matter. But if we don't have alignment, then that's where we find that we're off. Now, we don't have to get worried about the alignment. We just have to understand it that, hey, um, some experiences organizationally, culturally, personally, professionally, relationally, remember, it's as the old saying goes, pardon me, as the old saying goes, for a reason, for a season, or a lifetime, right? There are people who are going to be in your life for a reason, to learn a lesson, all those sorts of things. For a season, right? It's just a longer version of that. And then for a lifetime. And if we stress out about it, then we feel like we get into this winning and losing mindset. This thing that, well, I don't have somebody in my life, or I'm no longer this organization. It fell apart, and what do I do now? This organization was my life, right? Think of that notion. This organization was my life. Well, how many people think of their family the same way? But families can implode also, right? It doesn't matter how big the family that we're talking about. Families can have implosions. Now, some of that is a testing, right? It tests us and sees, it's testing our fortitude. Are we there to heal the wounds, or are we there to learn the lesson and move on? Some folks just don't want to evolve, right? It's just a fact. And we have to be careful we don't judge, even though we're challenging our own conditioning and the environment that we're in, right? Recognizing that in others. If others don't challenge their own conditioning to such an extent that they're doubling down on toxicity, then that's a problem, right? That's a problem. It's a problem for you because you're evolving and they're not. And it isn't to demonize them, it's just they're on a different trajectory. Their journey is different, right? But the thing we have to be aware of with the conditioning that we developed under is there's the extremes. Too loose of an environment, too rigid of an environment. Both are extreme, and both extremes will take people off onto a course where maybe too loose there's lack of accountability, maybe responsibility is a little lax, consistency, it's possible that this becomes, the outcome. Same thing with rigidity, over control, dictatorial mindset, just that over controlling, domineering. I have to dominate, right? It's that win at all costs, no matter what. Now this becomes destructive. So both extremes destructive. What we're shooting for is balance, right? We want to be creative and loose and independent enough to evolve, but we also want to have structure in our life, right? This is the balance. This is the middle path. That is the razor's edge. And the one way to understand how to get there is to look back and look to the side of your life and go, how have I been allowed to be conditioned, and what haven't I challenged about my conditioning that has muted or stunted my growth in a particular area? Could be emotional, could be physical, right? Could be intellectual. If you feel like, well, I'm not that smart, okay? Well, first of all, you need to stop telling yourself that. Start with the self-talk, okay? You're as smart as you want to be, right? Go out there and learn. I mean, there are so many avenues now. There's so many avenues. There's so many books out there. There's videos now. There's everything is out there. There is so much out there that there is a PhD. You could have multiple PhDs and no paper to show for it if you went out to just learn, right? But we've made even that, the conditioning of education has also been so stamped into us that we feel like, well, it's not valid if I didn't really. So if you pulled up a video on YouTube and you learned how to build a swimming pool, right? And it doesn't mean that you're a landscaper or architect, but you know how to do that. Now, if you and then continue that progression, I'm going to watch a video or I'm going to read a book about how to do this or how to do that or what makes up this and what makes up that. Can you not educate yourself? Yes, you can. Okay. Just because we institutionalize things doesn't mean that's the end all be all, right? And that's not to poo poo those institutions either. They're there for their own purpose. And we use those as an opportunity. They're a tool, right? They're a tool, no more, no less. If you create an idol of anything, what happens though is that now we hold on to it like a crutch, right? Well, I need to see somebody with a certificate from this institution. We become so obsessive about things. And why is that? That conditioning is taken over in a particular arena of your life. And I'm just using that as an example. It could be the organization. If you work for a particular vehicle, manufacturer, right? And you're just in love with that vehicle, right? But then they turn around and they have layoffs and they do all the things, and potentially you're not working there anymore. Now you're miffed, right? But now you're starting to question your paradigm a little bit. It doesn't mean you don't like the vehicles, but it does make you go, wait a second, right? And it makes you reflect. And and I'm using this little micro example as an example for you to look at any aspect of your life and say, where's my conditioning? What is it that I believed or that I was taught or told, right, that I should question? Now, it doesn't mean questioning it is to push it down and say, oh, no, that's not worthy. You may, in some instances, get to that. But more often than not, you're going to look at that and go, no, I just overinflated its importance. It isn't as important as I thought it was, right? Now, work-life balance now is a thing that you hear all over the place. But work-life balance years and years ago was just like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, right? Because work-life balance wasn't a priority. But then what do you see? Because of a lack of work-life balance, you saw implosion of the families, right? Implosion of aspects of culture. Just implosions all over the place. Stressors, and then those stressors leak out and cause havoc in other aspects of culture. So this is why we're talking about conditioning. You have to challenge your conditioning. Challenge the things that you were told in your developing years. Challenge them within, and this is within yourself, right? Challenge them within your own mind and your own heart and say, hey, Is this something that, was in line with me? Hey, I grew up saying I grew up being told, oh, you got to go out and do a functional job. And then you went out and did that because you're trying to what? Please other people. Could have been family, friends, doesn't matter. But you were out there you were trying to get validation for yourself by pleasing other people because you went out and did something. And you may have been good at what you did, but it may not have brought you joy, right? It may have been more rigid but inside you're a creative person. Maybe you're a singer, right? You're an engineer, but inside you want to sing. Okay. These may be in conflict with your life and how people see you. And this is challenging your conditioning. So you look at this and you evaluate and go, why can't I have both? Why can't I be both? You can be both, right? If you pull the extremes in, what do you have? You've got balance, right? That's all it is. It doesn't mean you throw your creativity away. You throw structure in your life away. No, not at all. It's a weaving. It's an integration of all these good things together, not throwing something away. And that's when you're challenging your conditioning, it isn't to challenge it to go to war with the thing that you once thought, because that's also not true, right? Because there are folks, it might be, let's say that particular vehicle example, manufacturer, it may be that just because that happened to you doesn't mean you now have to hate the people who still work there or have to hate that vehicle type or that manufacturer, right? Nothing says that has to be, right? It doesn't even have to be. And so many people will say on the surface, oh no, I don't hold any animosity, but underneath they're fuming, right? They're fuming. They're just trying to keep it down. And where do you think that comes out? Comes out in your health. It comes out in all other aspects of your life that you aren't even aware of because it's so subconscious, right? Your body feels it, even if you try to block it out. So you have to come to terms with it. You have to, with your heart and your head, you have to come to terms with your conditioning. You have to come to terms with, hey, you know what? Those people, they're just doing their job and they're just, trying to do the best they can for their lives. And that manufacturer, yeah, they're just trying to do their thing. And yeah, there may have been some bad apples in there that were unfair to some of the people, but that's going to be everywhere. So put it in its proper context, right? Don't go to war with that vehicle manufacturer just because your conditioning awakened you to the fact that there are some bad apples, right? So that's the thing you need to be aware of. Challenging your conditioning isn't, throwing out all the good with the bad, right? And it isn't to say that everybody is, suspect, but it is to say that how was I trained? How was I taught? What was I taught to and what not to? Either do, think, believe, all these things. And then question that because you're going to be stronger in those areas if you educate yourself in those areas more. And some of this questioning will lead to a growth. It'll lead to you challenging a particular thing and then maybe even becoming stronger in that subject area than those who are conditioning you. And you open a nuance to them, light up a room that they had never really thought about with the aspect of could be a belief system, could be a process, could be a whole systemic thing. You may challenge the way things are done on the whole, and people might look at you like, "What are you talking about?" And all these things. They may question you. They may question your veracity. But if we don't challenge our conditioning, we get stuck in a rut. And oftentimes those ruts become more to the extreme. Then we start to judge ourselves based on these extreme things. We start to judge ourselves based on, well, the material that I have, the money that I have, the wealth that I have, the relationships that I think I have, the relationships that I don't have. Like, oh, I don't associate with these people or those people, right? It becomes walls. Your conditioning becomes also validates now walls to preserve what? Your conditioned state. Because you need to put up walls for that conditioning to exist. If that condition can't exist on its own without walls to keep people out or to keep people in, however you whatever your mindset, then if it can't stand alone in any environment, then it's out of balance. Pretty easy, right? If you can't express yourself, if you can't express exactly how you feel about a thing in public, then you know you've been conditioned. If you can't, if you're concerned, well, XYZ will think poorly of me because of this, or if my house isn't perfect, or my this isn't just perfect, right? Perfectionism. This is also a conditioned behavior, right? A little OCD thrown in there, and uh, my mom was a little bit OCD. What we find about OCD, this is another thing about this conditioning. It's really just distracting yourself. I know this because I've done my own self-analysis of my past, years ago, and realized why am I? Ask yourself why am I this particular way? Why do I like things a particular way? Well, the reason why you like things a particular way is yes, you were conditioned that this is order is good. It's easier. There's a functional reason, right? But underneath that, when people reflex to those things, then you know it's a distraction from dealing with issues. I'll give you an example. My dad would say when he and my mom were agreeing about something, she would be up cleaning, vacuuming, cleaning the house, da da da, all this stuff at night. Well, people reflex back to their conditioning when they don't know how to deal with a particular problem or issue. So if you find yourself doing these things, like, I'm using household examples. Oh, when I get stressed out and I can't handle a thing, I go and I'm doing laundry, right? Or I'm going to go mow the yard, or I'm going to go out in my shop and build a chair or whatever. Now, it's fine to go out and do those. It's fine to do all these things. But if you find that that's a reflexive thing, it's like a little bit of a safe area, it's literally a safe space for you to be able to marinate on something. Not bad if you're just using that time to go within yourself and your thoughts. Fine. But if we're using that as an escape, right? If we're using our conditioning as an escape from dealing with other things, then we know we've been conditioned to do that. And we have to challenge that conditioning, because if we don't, we're going to constantly be reflexing to these certain things. This is why people like to argue and battle versus sit down and have a calm, conversation about, emotions and how they feel about things and their intellectual, pursuits. And there's some people who love it. I love that stuff. But there are some people who are afraid of that stuff. They'd much rather do anything else, right? Anything else than sit down and look you in the eye and talk about how they feel about a thing or what's going on with them, and the genuine, and open up. Why? Because they're afraid, and they've been conditioned that by generations before, or peers, friends, family, parents, whatever. They've been conditioned, right? That this is how we deal with problems. We deal with problems by avoiding them, and it really is avoidance, right? So if we don't challenge ourselves to to look at our conditioning, we will use that conditioning to avoid dealing with the things that are unhealed within us. Once we challenge that, then we can reflect back inward. We can say, oh, okay, I need to heal this thing. I got too much animosity toward X, Y, or Z. There are men out there, probably, you've heard, I've heard it, and it's a sad deal. You can tell they have a disdain for women because of certain aspects, and this, that, and the other. I've heard the very same thing from women. And it's sad. It saddens me that exists at all. But the reality is that they got there because they allowed their conditioning to take them down a particular road that they can't come to terms with, and or be open and communicate more. And you know what? Some of that communication is frustration, but it can't all be frustration. They can't always be about throwing darts and arrows at other people and saying, well, this and well, that. That's too easy. That's a cop out, right? That's cheap. That's low. That's low vibrational. It's beneath us, right? We need to raise, be high minded about things and say, look, I understand that you're frustrated, and that frustration is coming from another broken place. But I don't know what it is for you, but I respect the fact that you have it. But I also have to have a boundary that I won't be allow you to be treat me this particular way, or I don't need to be around you, right? If that's friends, family, whatever, people who typically you would be around, well, you need to draw a line in the sand, or and you can do so with respect. You can still love people from afar, love your family, but you don't need to live with them, right? That sort of thing. Well, if you're a nuclear family, that's a whole nother ball of wax, right? But way more complicated. Seek professional assistance for those things. But but if we're talking about more extended family and that sort of thing, that situation where, hey, I love these folks, but I also know they got stuff they got to figure out. They haven't crossed a bridge that I've crossed, or I'm working on crossing a bridge that they've already crossed. It might be you're the one that's a little spun up, a little tight, a little bit, right? You need to relax a little bit, right? Some people, they can't. They got to run to the bottle, right? Or run for drugs, or run for an extreme thing, run for whatever idol there is in their life. And that's another way that you know that you've conditioned yourself. And culture itself is now allowing our conditioning to intercede so that we have all these access to things that allow us to escape just talking to one another. Just look at each other in the eye and being honest and being heartfelt, right? So challenge your conditioning. This isn't just for your organization. This is within all of culture. Challenge your conditioning. Challenge your conditioning to all things. But be careful that we don't jump in and avoid challenging our own conditioning to challenge others, right? You can observe it in others, you can see it in others, and that allows you to have a gentle care about how you deal with them, right? Same way that if you've got a cracked vase, you're not going to just grab it, you're going to be careful with it, right? Why? You recognize the cracks. It doesn't mean you go up and smash the vase, right? Or you handle it roughly. No, you handle it with a little more care because you understand that there are significant cracks in this thing, right? So, same way. So you can observe those things externally, but handle those with care. With yourself, same way, right? There are going to be big issues, little issues, medium sized issues, all these things, conditioning that we grew up under, that we were developed under, that we never challenged along the way. But if we don't give ourselves a little slack, you got to give yourself time, but acknowledge these things and just relax and handle yourself with care the same way. Don't be so abrupt. Don't expect perfection. Don't expect, well, I got to be in control. I got to have my finger on the button, right? Of the situation at all times. You need to relax. Handle yourself with care, right? Give yourself the same treatment that you should be affording others, right? That's part of the whole notion of loving your neighbor too, right? So, in a nutshell. So, conditioning. We need to look within ourselves. We need to look how we were developed, look how we were trained, and challenge that. And then when we come back, and let's turn this inward on our organizations. If your conditioning is such that you're a dictator at work, or you're very demonstrative, you're managing from the middle, you're passive aggressive, you're doing all these things, but you've never really challenged it, challenge it. Challenge it within yourself and make a turn, make adjustments, right? Because you can build your team into a really fantastic, group if you are open and honest enough to be, light touch and handle your team with care. Doesn't mean they're all broken. Doesn't mean you have to act like they're all cracked and broken. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that you need to look within yourself and say, okay, where are the cracks in myself, right? Things that I think are strengths may actually be weaknesses. And if you don't look at those, look at your strengths. Really look at your strengths. Did they come from a reflex, from a conditioned response to other things, right? It's okay if it's healthy. If it's healthy, though, understand it. Hey, like I've said in past videos, my mom was OCD, so I had that example, right? The house is tic-tac tight, and But she wasn't mean or rude or awful toward me about it, right? It wasn't to that degree, right? That she was like, running around with her hair on fire, but she was that way, right? Now, that organizing element for me, pragmatically, well, yeah, hey, things are easier when things are in order, right? So there's a pragmatic element to that, but it didn't come from her thinking, "Oh, I want to be neat and organized," right? It was probably a reflex for her from dealing with other things, right, in her world. So these are the things that we have to acknowledge in how we were conditioned, understand how they affected us, be healthy with how we use that, how we were conditioned, right? Because some of this stuff has been beneficial to us as well. We have to give ourselves credit. Some of the conditioning has been healthy and good, especially if it's something where you sit down and you communicate with folks. But if your sit down to communicate with folks is just an invitation to throw barbs and arrows and all these things, then that's not, right? That's a trap. That's a trap that you just lay for people. And don't make that the case. All right, folks. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage folks. And when we do that, not only do we find culture helps to transform culture little by little, but we're also growing within ourselves at the same time. And that's an important aspect of our life. And we shouldn't think lowly of that. We should elevate that within ourselves and be thankful and appreciative, right, for the opportunities we've had. All right, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.